The morning light filtered through linen curtains, soft and syrupy, casting honey-colored patterns across the polished kitchen tiles. She stood at the stove in a pressed cream blouse, flipping scrambled eggs with one hand, unlocking her phone with the other. No reply. The text she sent last night, "Are you okay? You're late." I waited. Still marked as delivered. Unread. She stared at the screen for a moment longer than necessary before turning it face down beside the butter dish. The toaster popped. 2 slices, perfectly golden. She moved automatically, like choreography she'd rehearsed for decades. In the next room, the sound of her son laughing pulled her briefly out of her head. "He's watching cartoons again," her husband said behind her, voice low and amused, the warmth of his breath brushing past her neck as he kissed it lightly. She smiled. Not because she wanted to, because it was expected. "You slept late," she said, keeping her tone even. He shrugged, pouring himself coffee, still in the dress shirt from last night. Long call with Singapore. Couldn't get off the line. No apology, no details. She nodded, slid the eggs onto 3 plates, each with symmetrical portions. She placed one in front of their son, tousled his hair, and sat with her own plate untouched. Their son babbled about his game. Her husband scrolled on his phone. She watched them both, head slightly tilted, like something about this picture was just off. But no, everything was fine. Just a strange dream last night. Just tired. Her husband laughed suddenly, some meme on his screen, and reached to refill his cup. She watched the way his sleeve was still crisply folded, how his cufflink gleamed, how there wasn't a trace of sleep in his eyes. "You're dressed already?" she asked. "Big day," he replied, eyes not leaving his phone. "Meeting a new client. Early start." Her mouth opened, as if to say something else, but she closed it. What was there to say? Instead, she took a small bite of toast. Their son giggled at a cartoon explosion. "Eat your eggs," she said gently, almost by reflex. She watched the steam rise from her coffee and wondered if the unease in her chest was just caffeine on an empty stomach or something older, something buried. "You've got that look again," her husband said, lifting his eyes to meet hers. "What look?" she asked, startled. "Like you're somewhere else." He smiled. She forced a laugh. "Maybe I am." He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "Don't disappear on me, okay?" Her eyes fluttered shut for half a second. "Of course not." The moment passed. He stood, downed the rest of his coffee, adjusted his collar, and told their son he'd see him after school. The boy waved without looking up. The door clicked shut. Silence rushed in, thick, heavy. She sat alone at the table, finally allowing herself to check the time. 9:43 a.m. She picked up her phone again. Still no reply. She opened the messages. Saw the timestamp. 1:17 a.m. She hadn't heard him come in. The text read like a plea, simple, soft, not confrontational. "I'm just worried. Please let me know you're okay." She hovered her thumb over the keyboard, started typing, then deleted it. What was she even asking? What answer could he give that would stop the knot in her stomach? She looked around the kitchen, everything in place, marble countertops, fruit bowl. Her son's crayon drawing of a sun taped proudly to the fridge. Proof of a normal life. She rose, began clearing plates, mechanical. When she lifted her husband's plate, she noticed a smear of lipstick on his coffee cup. Not hers, pale pink. She stood there for a moment, just staring, then blinked. Slowly wiped it away with a sponge. When her son looked up from the tablet and asked for more juice, she smiled without missing a beat. "Of course, sweetheart." She poured it carefully, like nothing had happened, like everything was fine, like she hadn't just noticed her world tilt by one quiet, dangerous degree. It was just past midnight when the soft creak of the door stirred her from that fragile state between sleep and vigilance. She didn't move. She knew the shape of that sound, the way the door to her bedroom breathed slightly against the carpet, like a held secret. Then, the faint padding of small feet, hesitant, and then the warm dip of the mattress beside her. Her son slid under the blanket without a word, curling against her side like he used to when he had night terrors, but this was something else. He didn't tremble, didn't sniffle, just laid still with his breath shallow and alert. She felt his fingers graze hers, searching, seeking the comfort of contact, but even that touch was guarded. Then the whisper came, so soft it barely moved the air. "Mommy, Daddy has a girlfriend." Her breath caught. I heard them on the phone. He said she's getting the money. That you won't know." The words didn't hit her like a slap. No, they slid in like cold water beneath skin, slow, invasive, undeniable. She didn't gasp, didn't cry, just stared into the dark where the ceiling used to be. The only movement came from her fingers, curling into a fist under the sheet, nails digging into her palm. Her voice remained buried behind her clenched teeth. Silence was her only reply. Her son waited a moment longer, then shifted slightly, as if unsure whether he'd done something wrong. He whispered again, softer this time. "Don't tell him I told you." She blinked once, twice. The dark felt heavier now, like the walls had pressed closer around her. "I won't," she finally said, a breath more than a voice. The boy exhaled, relieved, and closed his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing evened out, and he drifted into sleep, as if the confession had cleansed him. But she remained still, wide-eyed, pinned to the bed by the weight of what she now knew, or maybe always suspected. Hours passed in fragments. She counted the seconds between each passing car outside. Her eyes burned, but she wouldn't close them. At dawn, she gently slipped out of bed, tucked the blanket around her son, and walked to the bathroom. She locked the door and stared at herself in the mirror. Same face, same eyes. But the edges felt thinner, like the membrane between normal and not was paper thin. She washed her face slowly, methodically, and stared at the drain as the water spiraled away. The whisper echoed again in her mind. She's getting the money. What money? What else had been decided without her knowledge? When she came downstairs, the house smelled like toast and citrus. Her husband stood in the kitchen, humming, buttering a piece of bread. "Morning, beautiful," he said. She smiled, automatic, hollow. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, taking a sip from his mug. "Yeah, fine." "You were restless," he noted. "Heard you walking around." She shrugged. "Just had a weird dream." He nodded, unfazed, and passed her a plate. "Eat something. You look pale." She sat across from him, watching his every movement like it was a performance. Because it was. Every smile, every laugh, every casual glance at his phone, all of it rehearsed, perfected. She chewed slowly, pretending to listen to his story about some neighbor's fence being repainted. Her son came down in pajamas, hair sticking up, and greeted them both with the same soft normalcy as any other day. No sign of what he'd whispered into the dark just hours earlier. She watched him sit beside his father, watched the man place a gentle hand on the boy's back. "You sleep okay, champ?" "Yeah," the boy replied, eyes focused on the cereal box. "Any weird dreams?" her husband teased. "Nope." The boy didn't even glance at her. She felt the nausea rise but swallowed it down with orange juice. "You okay?" her husband asked her again, more deliberate this time. She smiled too quickly. "Of course, just tired." "Maybe you need a spa day," he offered, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "Recharge." She nodded. "Maybe." She didn't pull her hand away, but she didn't squeeze his either. He went back to reading emails. Her son went back to his cereal. And she sat there, wondering how long she could keep playing her part without slipping. She got dressed that day like normal, drove her son to school, kissed him on the cheek, and told him to be brave. Watched him walk away without turning back. She sat in the car long after the bell rang, staring out the windshield at nothing, the world passing in muffled background noise. When she finally pulled away, her hands were trembling on the wheel. But she drove. She ran errands. She bought milk. She even complimented the cashier on her earrings, because that's what women like her do. They smile. They absorb. They float through betrayal like it's just a passing breeze. When she returned home, her husband's car was gone. The house felt different, emptier somehow. She walked into the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed where her son had whispered those words, and placed a hand on the pillow. Cold now. She opened the drawer of her husband's nightstand. Found nothing. Opened the closet. Same suits, same cologne. Nothing out of place, except it all was. Everything was. That night, she made dinner. Roast chicken. Rosemary. She knew it was his favorite. He complimented it, kissed her cheek again, poured wine like nothing had shifted, and she smiled, toasted, laughed at his joke, and somewhere inside, something began to calcify. She stood in the doorway of the study, half shadowed by the frame, watching him through the crack in the door as he leaned back in his office chair, one hand twirling a pen, the other holding the phone to his ear. His tone was low, warm, conspiratorial, the voice he used when he was charming, not performing. She couldn't hear everything, just fragments, syllables that hinted without confirming, but one line froze the blood in her veins. Transfer it there, she doesn't check. Her breath caught in her chest. She stood so still that even the wood under her feet held its creak. He laughed quietly on the call, then added, "She trusts me. That's the trick." Her stomach tightened. She stepped back silently, letting the hallway consume her like fog. In the kitchen, she busied her hands with the same motions as always, chopping, stirring, pouring everything mechanical, domestic, safe. When he entered a few minutes later, smiling and casual, rolling up his sleeves, she turned and handed him a glass of water like nothing had passed between them. "Who were you talking to?" she asked gently, eyes fixed on the cutting board. "Just work," he said easily. "Big account." He kissed her cheek. "You'll love the bonus." She smiled. The chicken simmered. He talked about nonsense, a coworker's promotion, a new brand campaign, how someone they both knew was getting divorced. "She's going crazy," he chuckled. Started accusing him of all sorts of crap. Jealousy does that to people. She laughed with him, not too much, just enough to be safe. She plated dinner, wiped her hands on the dish towel, and called their son to eat. They sat down like they always did, perfect family theater, with soft clinking of silverware and muted television glow. Their son talked about a classmate who lied about having a dog. Her husband pretended to be shocked. "Kids lie about everything," he said with an eye roll. She caught that moment how easily the word lie came out of his mouth, how familiar it felt on his tongue. The conversation moved on. She chewed without tasting. When her fork scraped the plate too loudly, both of them looked at her. She smiled again. "Sorry, just distracted." Her husband leaned over the table, searching her face with that concerned husband gaze. "You've seemed, I don't know, distant." "I'm fine," she said, too quickly. He held her gaze a beat too long. "You sure?" "Of course." She reached for her wine. The silence between words grew thick, and then, just as quickly, he switched back to his charming self, telling a story about a dumb prank from college. Her son laughed. She forced herself to laugh too. Later that night, in bed, she stared at the ceiling again. He lay beside her, scrolling on his phone. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "Just tired," she replied. "You've been tired a lot lately." "Work's been heavy." "You don't work." The air left the room for a moment. She turned to him slowly, smiled. "Housework." "Right," he said, tapping at his screen, uninterested. She watched the way the phone light illuminated his face, so calm, so composed, so clean, like guilt couldn't live there. He turned off the light without another word. She lay in the dark, awake for hours. Her son's voice replayed in her head like a curse. He said she's getting the money. But what did that mean? A fling? A misunderstanding? Surely he was just being dramatic. Maybe the boy misheard. Children do that. And her husband, yes, distant sometimes, private, but hadn't he always taken care of them? Paid the bills? Gave her everything? Surely this wasn't what she thought. She turned on her side, staring at the soft green light of the alarm clock. The numbers pulsed like a heartbeat. If she asked him outright, what would happen? What if she was wrong? What if she opened a door that wouldn't close again? She remembered her friend's divorce, how people took sides, how easy it was to get labeled hysterical, jealous, unstable. She couldn't afford that. Not now. Not with her son watching. She rolled over and pressed her face into the pillow, swallowing her suspicion like a bitter pill. The next morning, she cooked breakfast again. The same eggs, same toast, same juice. Her husband left early. Her son kissed her cheek and ran out the door with his backpack swinging. She lingered at the window, watching the car pull out of the driveway. Then, she sat at the kitchen table and did nothing. No laundry, no errands. Just sat and stared. Hours passed. She Googled his office. Looked up the name of the jewelry store she saw the bag from last week, the one in his trunk that he said was a client gift. She scrolled their catalog, necklaces, engagement bands. Not exactly corporate thank yous. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She typed in their bank's website, tried to log in. Password wrong. Again, wrong. She stared at the screen. Tried to remember if he'd changed it. Tried to remember when she last checked. Tried to breathe. She closed the laptop, picked up her phone, typed a message. "Hey, do you have the bank login? I'm trying to check something for taxes." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then nothing. She waited. 10 minutes. 20. No reply. She deleted the message, made tea instead. That night, he came home with flowers, white lilies, her favorite. "Just thought of you," he said, setting them in a vase. She smiled, said thank you, set the table for dinner. They watched a movie after, something soft and forgettable. Her son fell asleep on the couch. Her husband carried him to bed. When he returned, he wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You smell good," he said into her hair. She closed her eyes. "Thanks. You okay?" "Yes." "You'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" She paused. "Of course." He kissed her neck. She leaned back into him, not because she trusted him, not because she forgave him, but because this was the only form of safety left. Pretend, smile, wait, deny. The laughter was just a little too loud, just a little too sharp, ricocheting off the walls of the restaurant's private dining room, where soft jazz played and glasses chimed and couples leaned into each other with curated affection. She sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his thigh, her laugh delayed by half a second, not because she didn't understand the joke, but because she wasn't really there. Across from her, their friends, the Whitmans, the kind who always vacationed in places with villas and never said the word divorce above a whisper, were mid-story about someone's teenage son who tried to hack the school system. "And then get this, he locked the principal out of his own email," Mark said, slapping the table. "We didn't know whether to ground him or hand him a business loan." Her husband laughed, tipping his wineglass toward Mark in mock salute, and then turned to the group with a smirk. "Well, at least your kid's not like mine. Mine thinks his mom's losing it because she forgot her purse at the grocery store last week." Everyone burst into laughter again, loud, unfiltered, but her heart didn't move. She smiled, tilted her head, said, "I was distracted," but her tone landed too soft, too flat, and no one noticed. He grinned beside her, gave her a gentle nudge like it was all in good fun, and she responded with a chuckle she crafted like a costume measured, obedient. The moment moved on. The food arrived. Plates were passed. Toasts were made. She ate nothing. Her fork grazed the same corner of grilled salmon for 20 minutes while the wine warmed in her hand, untouched. When dessert came, she excused herself to the restroom and lingered in front of the mirror too long, staring at her reflection as if searching for a hairline crack in the glass that might explain why she felt like she was floating 3 inches outside her own skin. In the stall, she sat down fully clothed, hands clasped in her lap, and just breathed. Not cried, she wasn't allowed that kind of relief, just breathed. Later in the car, she looked out the window while he talked about how the Whitmans were doing better since that whole mess last year. He reached for her hand. "You were quiet tonight," she smiled. "Just a little tired. You've been saying that a lot." She gave a soft hum of agreement, not denial, not admission. He squeezed her hand. "You know I worry about you, right?" Her throat tightened. "I know. You'd tell me if something was wrong?" She nodded. Silence swelled between them. Then he said, "Maybe we should take a weekend. Just us. Get your mind off things." She turned her face toward the window, let her smile fade in the darkness. "Maybe." When they got home, she undressed in silence, folded her blouse with ritual precision, brushed her teeth until her gums bled. She climbed into bed before him, curled to one side, and listened to the sound of drawers opening, belts sliding, hangers clinking. He climbed in moments later, warm and heavy beside her. "You're still far away," he murmured. She didn't reply. He pulled her close, wrapped his arm over her waist, and whispered, "I miss when you were soft with me." Her skin flinched under his touch, but she didn't move. She let him hold her. Let him pretend. Let herself pretend. That night, she dreamed of walking through the house while everything disappeared, the furniture, the walls, the floor beneath her feet, even her son, fading in pieces like fog dispersing in sun. She woke up in a cold sweat, gasping, but the sound never left her throat. The next morning, while making coffee, she stood by the window and watched the mailman place a bundle of letters in their box. Her husband came down, freshly showered, kissed her cheek, took his travel mug, and said, "Meeting in 30. "Love you," she smiled. "Love you too." But it felt like watching someone else speak. When he left, she retrieved the mail. Most of it was junk. One was from a bank she didn't recognize. She opened it. Inside was a form letter addressed to her husband, confirming a recent wire transfer to a trust account. Her name was nowhere on the document. Her hands trembled. She placed it in the drawer beneath the coffee filters, out of sight. When she picked up her son from school that day, he was quiet, not moody, guarded. When she asked how his day went, he said, "Fine." When she asked if anything happened, he said, "Nope." She reached to touch his arm as he climbed in the car, but he pulled away, not rudely, just absent-mindedly. But she felt it. That night, at dinner, she brought up a memory from when he was 5, the one where he had spilled juice all over his father's laptop. "Remember that?" she asked with a soft smile. Her son blinked. "No," her husband laughed. "He was too little. Probably blocked it out. You're the only one who clings to that stuff." She nodded, chewing quietly, pretending her heart wasn't fraying strand by strand. After dinner, her husband took their son upstairs for homework. She stayed in the kitchen, hands flat on the table, listening to the faint murmur of voices from above. At one point, she heard her name, then a pause, then more whispering. She poured a glass of wine but didn't drink it. She just held it, watching the red light ripple across the table as if it might reveal some hidden message. Later that evening, her husband sat beside her on the couch, watching the news. His hand grazed her thigh. "You seem better tonight. Do I?" Yeah, calmer. "Maybe I'm just tired." Again with the tired, he said with a soft chuckle. She looked at him then, eyes steady. "Would you tell me if you were hiding something?" He blinked, then smiled like she'd told a joke. "Hiding what? My secret gambling addiction? Anything." He leaned in, pressed his forehead to hers. "I have nothing to hide from you. You know that, right?" "Right," she whispered. He kissed her lips. She kissed him back. Not because she believed him, but because denial was safer than the avalanche she could feel building just behind her ribs. He pulled her close. She let him. In the dark, her eyes remained open long after his closed. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't ask again, because if she asked, he might lie, and worse, he might not. The rain tapped gently against the windshield like a quiet metronome as she sat in the parked car outside the pharmacy, keys still in the ignition, headlights off, engine humming low like a secret waiting to be spoken. The receipt in her hand trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the silent storm inside her that refused to quiet down. He had told her he was at the gym. "Late session, won't be back till 10, he'd said, voice breezy. Normal, too normal. But his gym bag had never left the front hall, and the location on his phone, once something they shared out of routine and convenience, now pulsed with deceit. He had switched it off an hour ago. She knew, because she had checked, then checked again, each time hoping it was a glitch, each time hoping it wasn't. She let the receipt drop to the floor of the car and stared at the bag in the passenger seat, a nondescript white paper bag from a boutique store she had never entered before today. The name was handwritten in gold cursive on the front. She had seen the same bag peeking out from the back seat of his car 2 weeks ago, crumpled slightly, half hidden under a sweater. He said it was for a client. Today, she walked into that store and asked the cashier, "Hi, I'm looking to exchange something my husband bought." And the girl behind the counter had smiled, reached under the register, and pulled out a small envelope. "Gift receipt," she said. "Is this for the bracelet?" A beat. "Yes," she lied. The bracelet had a name engraved inside it. Not her name, not their son's name, a name she didn't recognize. She didn't ask, didn't need to. Now she sat in the car and stared out at the puddles, watching her reflection ripple across broken water. Her phone buzzed. A text from him. "Heading home. Need anything?" She typed, "All good. See you soon." Then she turned the phone over and placed it face down on the seat beside her. When she returned home, she moved like a ghost coat hung, keys placed, shoes aligned. She checked the security camera footage from the doorbell, his phone's connected too. She watched herself walk up the driveway, watched the timestamp, watched nothing out of the ordinary. Normal. Everything was always normal. She went to his study, opened drawers. Slowly, methodically. Files, tax folders, contracts, everything labeled, everything organized. Except one folder was missing, the one she had seen last spring, labeled with both their names. She tried the locked drawer. Still locked. She walked to the kitchen, pulled the junk drawer, found the paperclip, the thin, flat screwdriver she used for eyeglasses. Back in the study, hands steady, breath shallow, she worked the lock like she'd practiced once before when trying to retrieve their son's hidden Halloween candy. A soft click. The drawer opened. Inside documents, wills, powers of attorney, one marked with a recent date just last month. Her name was there, crossed out, replaced. With someone else, her hands began to shake. She read the fine print 3 times before she could fully process it. He had changed beneficiaries, adjusted access, all legal, all neat, all without telling her. A sound behind her, a creak on the floorboards, made her snap the drawer shut so fast her fingers caught. She gasped, then froze. Silence. She turned slowly. Nothing. Empty hallway. Just the house shifting on its bones like it always did. She placed everything back exactly as it was, locked the drawer, returned the paperclip to the junk drawer. She looked at the clock. 20 minutes till he got home. She made tea, sat on the couch, turned on a baking show, and smiled when he walked in. He kissed her forehead. "Hey, how was your day?" "Uneventful," she said. He sat beside her, pulled her feet onto his lap, massaged her ankle. "Dinner?" he asked. "Let's order in." He smiled. "Lazy tonight?" She smiled back. "Something like that." Later, after they'd eaten, after her son had gone to bed, she did one more thing. Logged into her email. Reset her password. Then tried to log into the bank again. Still denied. She clicked, "Forgot password." The recovery email wasn't hers anymore. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then checked the trash folder. Deleted emails. One was a confirmation of password change. Authorized. Dated 2 weeks ago. She tried to forward it to herself, but the message bounced, access restricted. She closed the laptop, sat in silence. Across the room, he watched her. "You've been on that thing a lot lately," he said, not unkindly. She looked up. "Just paying bills. I told you I'd take care of all that. I like knowing what's going on. That's why I handle it," he said gently, the way someone might talk to a nervous patient. "So you don't have to worry." She nodded slowly. "You're right," he smiled. "Tired? Exhausted. Come to bed." She followed him upstairs, brushing her fingers along the banister like she needed to touch something real, something fixed. In the bedroom, she undressed carefully. Her skin felt too tight. Her ribs hurt. Her heart kept whispering warnings, but her mouth said nothing. As she lay beside him, he curled toward her, nuzzled her shoulder and whispered, "We're okay, right?" She kissed his forehead. "Of course." Then she stared at the ceiling while he drifted into sleep, and she whispered to no one, "Not yet." It started with small things, almost unnoticeable at first. His offhand comments at dinners, the subtle way his words painted her as forgetful, frazzled, emotionally distant, and the way others began to mirror his tone without realizing they were complicit. "She's just been a little out of it lately," he'd say, chuckling gently when she misremembered an appointment or repeated a story, and people would smile politely, awkwardly, not wanting to get involved but silently agreeing with the performance. One Saturday afternoon, she walked into the living room to find him on the phone with her sister, his voice low and full of concern. He didn't hear her enter until it was too late. No, she's not crazy. I'd never say that. But she's definitely not herself. You should come by more often. Check in. I think she just needs support." Her breath caught mid-step, but she kept walking, acting as though she hadn't heard a thing. He glanced over at her and smiled warmly, like everything was fine. After he hung up, he said, "Your sister's going to drop by this week. I think it'll be good for you." "Good for me?" she echoed. "You've seemed overwhelmed lately," he replied gently, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Don't take it the wrong way. We all need help sometimes." She nodded slowly, eyes on the floor, heat rising in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the rage she was learning how to hide. That night, he brought home her favorite dessert and poured her a glass of wine. "For everything you do," he said, raising a toast. She clinked her glass to his, smiled, said thank you, then cleaned the kitchen in silence while he watched television. A few days later, at a casual dinner with family, he shared a light anecdote about how she'd left the stove on. Everyone laughed, but her chest tightened. He added, I keep telling her to take breaks. She's running herself ragged. Her cousin nodded. Self-care's important, especially at your age. At your age. She felt the words slice through her like paper cuts, tiny, almost ignorable, but adding up fast. She said nothing, just smiled, laughed on cue, and excused herself to the bathroom, where she stood staring at her reflection and whispered, "You're not crazy. You're not crazy." When she returned to the table, the conversation had moved on to vacation plans. He turned to her and said, "Wouldn't it be nice to get away? Somewhere warm. No responsibilities, no pressure." She nodded, forced a smile, and quietly reached under the table to dig her fingernails into her palm, just to feel something sharp. The next morning, her sister came by unexpectedly. "Just checking in," she said brightly. "How've you been?" "Fine," she replied, stepping aside. "Busy." They sat in the sunroom, sipping tea, but the conversation was stilted. Her sister glanced at her too often, lingered on questions like, "Have you been sleeping okay?" And, "Are you still taking your vitamins?" Like she was reading off a list. "He's worried about you," her sister said softly. "He thinks you've been overwhelmed." She set her cup down slowly. "Do I seem overwhelmed to you?" Her sister hesitated. "Not overwhelmed, just a little off. You repeat yourself sometimes, forget things." "Like what?" "I don't know, just little things." "Little things," she repeated, voice cold now. "Isn't it strange how people only start noticing your mistakes once someone else tells them to look for them?" Her sister shifted uncomfortably. "We're just worried." "Worried," she echoed. "Right." She smiled and changed the subject. The next day, while folding laundry, her son walked by and casually said, "Dad says you've been stressed." She looked up from the towels. "Did he?" "Yeah. He says he might take you to a doctor." Her throat went dry. "What kind of doctor?" The boy shrugged. "I don't know. Just someone to talk to." She nodded slowly, folded another towel, and stared at the hallway after he left. That evening, her husband placed a brochure on the kitchen island. It was for a wellness center, pastel colors, smiling faces, vague words like balance and clarity. "Just a thought," he said. "They help with stress, sleep, mental fog. You could do a session or two, no pressure." She picked up the brochure, flipped through it, then placed it back down without a word. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. "I just want you to feel like yourself again." She didn't reply. That night, she checked their voicemail and found one she hadn't heard, her husband speaking softly to a doctor's office. "Yes, I'm calling about my wife. She's been having some memory lapses, confusion, mood shifts. I'd like to schedule a consult." Her knees went weak. She sat on the floor in the hallway and stared into space until the message ended. The next morning, she woke up early, made breakfast, packed her son's lunch, and kissed him goodbye like everything was normal. Her husband kissed her temple, said, "I'll be home late, client dinner," and walked out the door with his briefcase. She waited 10 minutes. Then went into his office, opened his laptop, and checked the calendar. No client dinner, nothing scheduled. She opened his browser. Found a tab still open in incognito mode. A rental listing for an apartment, 1 bedroom, downtown, move-in date next month. She closed the laptop, sat back in the chair, and tried to steady her breathing. That evening, he came home with sushi. "Thought we'd do something easy tonight," he said. "Long day." She nodded, set the table. As they ate, he asked her how her day was. "Quiet," she said. "I did some reading." "Good," he smiled. "That's good." After dinner, while their son played video games upstairs, he took her hand. "Have you thought any more about the wellness center?" "Yes. And? I think you're right. I could probably use a little help." His face lit up, warm and relieved. "I'm so glad you said that. Will you come with me?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. If that helps." She leaned forward, touched his cheek. "I just want us to be okay again." "We will be," he said. "I promise." That night, as he slept beside her, she lay wide awake, rehearsing what she would say when the time came, when anyone asked her, finally, if she felt safe, if she could trust him. If she had been lying to herself this entire time. She didn't know if she would tell the truth. She didn't know if she could. It happened by accident, like all irreversible things do not through a grand discovery or a deliberate search, but in the quiet, ordinary moment of folding laundry. She was kneeling by the living room ottoman, sorting socks into their mismatched pairs, her son's tiny t-shirts, her husband's dress shirts, freshly warm and smelling faintly of detergent and domestic repetition. She reached for his blazer, something he hadn't worn in weeks, maybe months, and as she turned it inside out to smooth the lining, something thudded softly onto the rug. Her heart skipped before her eyes even caught the shape. A phone, but not his. Sleek, unfamiliar, no case, and silent. Her hands froze. For a second, she just stared at it as if the object might vanish if she looked long enough. Then slowly, carefully, she picked it up. The screen lit up at her touch, no fingerprint required. No lock screen, just a string of recent messages open in full view, like an invitation, like a dare. The most recent thread had no name saved, just a number. One line sat waiting. She's close to finding out. Move fast. Her stomach flipped. She scrolled up. Earlier messages. She asked again today. What did you tell her? Same thing. That it's stress. She believed it. Good. Let's get the transfer done before next week. Her hand shook, not violently, but enough to blur the screen, enough to feel her own pulse in her fingertips. She stood, turned slowly, listening for footsteps. The house was quiet. Her son upstairs. Her husband out, he said he was grabbing groceries. Wouldn't be long. She knew she had minutes, maybe seconds. She opened the photo app. Nothing. Camera roll empty. No email app installed. Just messages. Just that thread. She took a mental snapshot of the number, then slid the phone back into the blazer pocket, exactly where it had been, folded it neatly, placed it on top of the pile. Her breath caught in her chest like a trap. She rose and walked to the sink, ran cold water over her wrists, the way her grandmother used to say cooled the nerves. She looked at her reflection in the window's glass. Her own eyes startled her, wide, dark, unreadable. When he came home 20 minutes later, smiling, holding a brown paper bag with milk and tomatoes and a receipt, he left face up on the counter like a badge of innocence. She didn't flinch. Everything okay? He asked, placing a kiss on her cheek. Yes, she said. Everything's fine. That night, she set the table, listened to her son talk about school, watched her husband nod and smile and ask follow-up questions like the perfect father in a parenting article. She didn't speak much. Just enough. When her son reached for her hand, she squeezed it gently. You're quiet tonight, her husband said, after their son went to bed. Just tired, she replied, the sentence now a mantra, a protective spell. Want to talk about anything? No. He leaned in, brushed her hair behind her ear. You sure? Positive. He stared at her for a beat too long, then stood. I'll be in the office if you need me, she nodded. Watched him disappear down the hallway. Waited, counted 90 seconds, then walked upstairs to her son's room. Hey, she whispered, sitting on the edge of his bed. Yeah? He murmured sleepily. Do you remember what you told me before, about Daddy? The boy hesitated, eyes blinked open halfway. I didn't mean to make trouble. You didn't, she whispered. I just need to know. Who did he talk to? The boy frowned. I don't know her name. Just, he calls her after you go to sleep. You've heard him? A nod. What does he say? Stuff about fixing things. About you being tired a lot. And how soon they'll be ready. Her throat went dry. Ready for what? I don't know. She brushed his hair back, kissed his forehead. Okay, go to sleep. He nodded and rolled over. She stood in the dark, staring at the shape of her son's small body, curled under the blanket, and felt a rising dread that pressed against the inside of her chest like a scream with no sound. Back downstairs, her husband had closed the study door. She heard the muffled clack of his keyboard, the low murmur of his voice on yet another call. She didn't approach, didn't knock. Just walked past, slow, quiet, then slipped into their bedroom and closed the door behind her. She stood there for a long time, fingers pressed against the cool wood, and finally allowed her face to crumple, not into tears, not yet, but into something darker. She had seen enough. She had heard enough. The phone, the messages, the change in her son, the growing silence from family, the brochure left on the counter, the way her name had begun to vanish from documents that once tethered her to a life that now felt like a lie stitched together with charm and control. She turned off the lights, lay on her side, eyes wide open. Sleep did not come. The distance began so quietly she almost didn't feel it at first. The subtle changes woven into the fabric of their daily routine like invisible threads being pulled one by one. He no longer called her Mommy, just Mom, in that tentative, testing way children use when they're gauging how much space they can claim as their own. Breakfasts grew quieter. Where he once told her about friends and games and teachers, now he chewed in silence, eyes flicking between her and the phone in his hand that she didn't recognize. A new phone, black, sleek, clearly not one she had bought him. "Where did you get that?" she asked one morning, trying to keep her voice light. "Dad gave it to me," he said. "For emergencies." She nodded slowly, turning back to the coffee pot. "That's thoughtful." He looked at her like he didn't quite believe the tone of her voice. "He just wants me to be safe," he added. "Of course," she said. "He's a good dad." The words came out brittle. Later, as she washed the dishes, she caught the reflection of her son in the kitchen window, him sitting on the couch, whispering into that phone, half smiling, then quickly hanging up when she turned. That night, when her husband came home, she mentioned it casually. "You got him a new phone?" He looked up from his tie with practiced confusion. "Oh yeah, just for after-school check-ins. Did he not tell you?" "He did," she said. "I just didn't know." He smiled softly. "I thought I mentioned it. You didn't. My mistake." He kissed her cheek and walked away before she could respond. A small thing. Always small things. A few days later, she found her son sitting on the stairs, face lit by the glow of that phone, whispering again. "Who are you talking to?" she asked gently. He startled, clutching it to his chest. "No one." Sounded like someone, just a friend. She stepped closer, hand out. "Let me see." "No," he snapped, louder than she'd ever heard him before. The sound stunned them both into silence. His face softened. "Guilty." "Sorry," he mumbled, standing and brushing past her toward his room. She stood there, heart pounding, her hand still suspended midair. That night, her husband said, "You've been tense with him lately. He told me you yelled." "I didn't," he said. "You scared him." Her throat tightened. "He's lying." He sighed, slow and weary, like a man forced to carry more than his share. "He's a child. He doesn't lie, not about things like that. He's repeating things you've told him," she whispered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're teaching him to see me differently." He stared at her, eyes unreadable. "Maybe he's just seeing clearly." She froze. "What's that supposed to mean?" He smiled faintly. "Not cruel, just measured. Nothing. Forget it." He turned off the lamp, rolled over, and left her in the dark with her pulse hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The next morning, her son avoided her eyes. He grabbed his backpack, muttered "bye," and slipped out before she could even hug him. After school, he went straight to his room and closed the door. When she knocked, he said, "Homework." When she knocked again later, he said, "Talking to Dad." She stood outside the door, hand pressed against the wood, and listened. She couldn't make out words. Just the rhythm of conversation, low and easy, the kind of tone her husband used when coaxing people into trust. She went downstairs, sat on the couch, and stared at the family photos on the wall, the three of them smiling, her hand on her son's shoulder, his hand on hers. Now it looked like a photograph of strangers. Later that evening, she stood in the kitchen doorway, listening as her son came downstairs. He stopped at the counter, took his jacket, and glanced toward the living room. "Going somewhere?" she asked. "Dad said I could go to the park." "It's dark. He's picking me up. Without telling me?" He shrugged. "He said you'd be busy." Her heart lurched. "I'm never too busy for you." He looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered in his expression, a hesitation, a twinge of pity maybe, but it was gone before she could name it. "I'll be back soon," he said, and left. She waited by the window, watching the taillights fade. They didn't return for 2 hours. When they did, her husband walked in first, easy smile in place. "We grabbed ice cream," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Didn't want to wake you. I wasn't asleep. Still up worrying." "I didn't know where you were. You could have called. You had his phone." His smile faltered just a fraction before returning to full strength. "You need to trust me." She didn't reply. Her son slipped past, heading upstairs. "Say goodnight to your mother," he reminded. "Night, Mom," the boy mumbled without turning. She stood in the quiet that followed. Every sound in the house suddenly too sharp, the tick of the clock, the hum of the fridge, her own breath. Later, she went upstairs and stood outside her son's door again. Light seeped out from under it. She heard the faint buzz of that phone again, then silence. The next morning, she found a note on the kitchen counter in her husband's handwriting. "Doctor's appointment confirmed. Don't worry, it'll help." She stared at it, the words swimming. When her son came down, dressed for school, she asked, "Did Daddy tell you about the appointment?" He nodded, eyes on his cereal. "He says it's just to make sure you're okay." "And what do you think?" He shrugged. "Maybe he's right." She felt the world tilt slightly, a subtle gravitational shift that made everything off balance. "Do you think I'm not okay?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Sometimes you forget stuff." "Like what?" "You said you'd pick me up early last week." "But you didn't." She blinked, remembering. That was the day she followed his father's car for an hour, lost him near the interstate. "You're right," she whispered. "I forgot." He nodded, relieved somehow, and went back to eating. That night, when her husband came home, he brought her flowers again, daisies this time. He placed them in front of her and smiled. "See? Still us." She smiled back because the only thing more dangerous than being wrong was proving him right. It began subtly, like a fog settling over everything familiar, dimming the edges of her life one relationship at a time. First it was her sister, who stopped calling every evening, her texts growing shorter, polite, neutral. Then her best friend, who had always been quick to reply, suddenly too busy to meet for coffee, her voice hesitant when they finally spoke. "He said you've been having a hard time," her friend murmured, her tone wrapped in concern that felt more like distance. "Just worried about you, that's all." "A hard time," she repeated, unsure if she was supposed to agree or defend herself. "What did he tell you?" "Nothing bad," her friend said too quickly. "Just that you've been under stress." She smiled. Forced. Everyone's under stress. But her friend's silence on the other end felt like a wall closing in. At the grocery store, people she'd known for years smiled strangely, their faces carrying that polite pity reserved for the quietly broken. At church, the pastor's wife touched her arm and said, "We're praying for your clarity." Clarity, the word stuck in her throat. Her husband, meanwhile, became more affectionate, more visibly supportive in public, hand at her back, soft smiles, quiet corrections. When she hesitated while paying for groceries, he chuckled lightly and said, "She's been forgetting things lately, too many lists, right, honey?" The cashier laughed awkwardly. She smiled back because that's what she was supposed to do. Later in the car, he said, "Don't take it personally. People notice when you're quiet. I'm just helping them understand." She stared out the window. "Understand what? That you're not well. I'm fine." "Of course you are," he said, his tone too kind. "But everyone needs help sometimes." She turned to him then, watched his profile as he drove, the calm jaw, the steady hands, and wondered if anyone had ever gaslit the entire world as easily as he breathed. That night, she opened Facebook and saw it, a post from his account, written in that carefully casual voice of his. "Mental health is real. We all need to support those we love through the hard days. Compassion first, judgment never." Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments filled with hearts and sympathy. Her own sister had commented, "You're a wonderful husband. She's lucky to have you." She stared at the screen until her eyes blurred, then closed the laptop with trembling hands. The next day, she went to pick up her son from school. The teacher smiled politely but didn't meet her eyes. "Your husband mentioned you might need reminders for pickup times," she said softly. "We're happy to help however we can." "Reminders?" she echoed. "I'm here on time." "Of course," the teacher said, her tone patronizing, apologetic, final. In the car, her son didn't speak. He scrolled through his phone, eyes hidden behind new earbuds. "Can you take those out?" she asked gently. He sighed, exaggerated, and obeyed. "You okay?" she asked. "Fine." "Anything happen at school?" "No." She wanted to ask if his friends had said something, if anyone had told him to be careful around her, but the question stuck. That night, when she went to make dinner, she realized there were no groceries. The fridge was nearly empty. "You didn't go shopping?" he asked when he came home. "I thought you said you would." "I did," she lied. "I must have forgotten." He smiled, patted her shoulder. "See? This is what I mean. You're stretched too thin. You need to rest." The next morning, she called her sister again, the call ringing 3 times before going to voicemail. She tried her mother. No answer. The isolation wasn't loud. It was soft, quiet, systematic, a gentle cutting away until she was surrounded only by the sound of her own uncertainty. That evening, her husband poured her a glass of wine, handed it to her with a look of pity so rehearsed it made her stomach twist. "You should take a break from social media," he said. "People get the wrong idea. They worry when they see strange posts." "What posts?" she asked. "You shared something at 3 in the morning." "No, I didn't." "You must have forgotten." He showed her his phone. There it was, her profile, her name, a post she had never written. "Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. Maybe I already have." She stared at it, cold spreading through her chest. "I didn't write that." "Then who did?" he asked softly. "You left your laptop open. Maybe your memories just—" "Don't," she said sharply. His face softened, saintly. "I'm just saying you've been tired, that's all." She looked away before he could see the tears in her eyes. Later that night, she deleted her account, sat in the dark, phone on her lap, watching her reflection in the black screen. When her son came in to say goodnight, he lingered at the door, uncertain. "Dad says you're sick," he whispered. "Am I?" she asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. "You don't seem like you used to." "What was I like?" "Happier." She nodded slowly. "Good night, sweetheart." After he left, she sat in silence until the house was asleep and finally whispered into the dark, "He's not saving me. He's erasing me." It arrived on a Tuesday morning, disguised in civility, an envelope, cream-colored, thick, formal, resting neatly atop the mail pile like a gift she hadn't asked for. Her name was printed in bold on the front, elegant typeface, her husband's initials handwritten in the corner. She tore it open absent-mindedly, expecting bills or notices, until she saw the heading, "Petition for Temporary Guardianship." Her hands froze, the paper trembling. The words blurred together, too impossible to read at first. She blinked once, twice, and forced her eyes to focus. Her husband's name listed as petitioner, her own listed as respondent. The reason, concerns for mental instability, recent behavioral volatility, and inability to manage personal or financial affairs. Her breath hitched. She sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the world narrowing to the sound of the refrigerator hum and the faint tick of the clock. When she finally looked up, he was standing in the doorway, briefcase in hand, face unreadable. "You opened it," he said softly, as if she'd unwrapped a surprise too early. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's temporary," he said calmly. "Just a precaution. You've been under a lot of stress." "A precaution?" Her voice broke, rising for the first time in weeks. "You're trying to take my life away." He crossed the room, hands raised in a placating gesture. "No one's taking anything away. It's just until you get help." "Help?" she repeated, almost laughing. "You're the one who needs, please," he said, cutting her off with quiet authority. "You're scaring our son." Her mouth opened, but no words came. She looked past him toward the staircase, and there he was, her son, standing halfway down, eyes wide, uncertain, the envelope still in her shaking hand. "Sweetheart," she said softly, but he stepped back, gripping the railing. "Dad said you're sick," he murmured, his voice small but certain, like he'd rehearsed it. The paper slipped from her hand, floating to the floor like something dying. She turned back to her husband, her voice trembling but sharp. "You told him that?" "He deserves the truth," he said simply. "He deserves stability." "Stability?" she spat. "You're the one lying, manipulating, transferring everything. Stop," he said, the word quiet but final. "This isn't helping." "You think I'm crazy," she whispered. "You're making everyone else think so." "No," he said softly. "I think you're hurting, and I can't watch you spiral anymore." She felt the floor tilt beneath her, as though the house itself had betrayed her. He took a step closer, voice dropping to a rehearsed gentleness. "You don't have to fight this. It's temporary. Once you're better, we'll fix everything." "Better," she echoed, hollow. "And if I don't get better?" He smiled faintly, eyes kind, almost sad. "Then I'll still take care of you." The doorbell rang before she could reply. 2 people stood outside, a woman with a clipboard, another with a folded letter. "Mrs. Callahan?" the woman asked. We're here for a wellness check. She blinked, the sound of her pulse roaring in her ears. What? Her husband appeared behind her, all composed professionalism. I called earlier, he said. She's been struggling. Just making sure she's safe. I'm fine, she said, voice breaking. I don't need... Ma'am, the woman interrupted, tone gentle but firm. We just need to talk. Can we come in? She looked to him for help, for rescue, out of instinct more than hope. He nodded softly, reassuringly. It's okay. They're here to help. She wanted to scream, but the weight of everyone's calm pressed down on her like a hand over her mouth. She stepped aside mechanically, let them in, answered their questions with trembling politeness. No. She hadn't been sleeping well. Yes, she sometimes forgot meals. No, she hadn't been seeing a therapist. When they asked if she ever felt unsafe, she hesitated. Her husband's presence in the corner of the room was quiet but enormous. No, she whispered finally. I'm fine. They left after 20 minutes, leaving behind a card and a quiet sense of inevitability. He turned to her, sighing like a man carrying the burden of compassion. See? That wasn't so bad. She stared at him, something in her chest fracturing open. You're killing me slowly, she said, barely audible. He smiled, tender. Don't say things like that. He kissed her forehead, picked up his briefcase, and left for work. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house, sharp and final. She sat at the table for hours, the petition lying beside the cold coffee cup, sunlight creeping across the floor like time itself had grown bored of her confusion. By the time her son came home, she had folded the document neatly, placed it in a drawer, and put dinner in the oven. When he sat down to eat, he didn't look at her. How was school? She asked. Fine. Did Dad pick you up? Yeah. She tried to smile, but it trembled. I love you, you know. He nodded absently. Dad says you'll feel better soon. Did he? She murmured. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door of her husband's study. Through the thin slit of light beneath it, she saw the shadow of movement. His hand, maybe, his phone pressed to his ear. She stepped closer, pressed her ear against the wood. Yes, he said softly. Paperwork's done. We'll proceed next week. A pause. No, she doesn't know yet. She backed away slowly, every breath shallow, her heartbeat an alarm she couldn't silence. She wanted to storm in, confront him, scream until the walls broke, but she didn't. She went back to their room, lay in the dark, and stared at the ceiling. The world had already chosen its story, and she wasn't the one telling it. The morning she lost everything was deceptively ordinary, sunlight crawling lazily across the living room floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint chirp of birds outside that sounded almost rehearsed. She was washing a mug when the knock came, soft but insistent, the kind that carries authority. She dried her hands on a towel and opened the door to find two people standing on the porch, a woman in a navy blazer holding a clipboard and a man in plain clothes with a badge clipped to his belt. Behind them, her husband stood, arms crossed, face calm, compassionate, like someone who'd just made an unbearable but necessary decision. Mrs. Callahan? The woman said gently. We're here to execute a temporary wellness transfer order. It's just a short observation period. The words felt foreign, clinical, harmless in tone, but lethal in meaning. Transfer? She echoed. Observation? Her husband stepped forward. Honey, please don't be alarmed. It's for your safety. My safety, she said, her voice shaking. You did this. You've been struggling, he said softly, his eyes glistening with practiced sorrow. You haven't been eating, sleeping, thinking clearly. You need rest. She turned to the officials, searching their faces for a hint of doubt, some flicker of human recognition, but their expressions were professional masks. You can't take me, she whispered. I'm not sick. The man spoke this time, voice even. It's just for evaluation, ma'am, a few days. You'll come home soon. Behind him, her son appeared at the top of the stairs, holding the banister, his face pale, his eyes wide. Mom? He called, hesitant. Sweetheart, she said, her voice breaking. Tell them I'm fine. The boy looked at his father, then back at her, torn. Dad says you need help, he said softly. The sentence was quiet, but it detonated inside her. No, she whispered, please. She took a step forward, reaching for him, but the man gently blocked her path. "Ma'am, let's not make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder?" she repeated, the word cracking in her throat. "You're taking me from my home." Her husband stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No one's taking you anywhere. This is just a pause. We'll visit, okay? Me and him." He nodded toward their son. The boy stood frozen, gripping the railing like it was the only solid thing left in his collapsing world. "Please," she said again, quieter now, looking directly at him. "Look at me. You know me. You know I wouldn't hurt anyone." He blinked rapidly like he was trying not to cry, then looked away. "Mom," he whispered, "just go with them." She felt her knees weaken. The woman with the clipboard touched her arm gently. "Let's get your things, okay?" "I don't need anything," she said numbly. The next few minutes blurred into motion without sensation, her bag being packed, the sound of papers rustling, the low murmur of signatures exchanged. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and betrayal. Her husband followed her to the door. "I'll come tomorrow," he promised, his hand brushing her shoulder. She flinched. "You won't need to," she said, her voice flat. "You've already erased me." He sighed, that same saintly exhale of patience he'd perfected. "You'll thank me one day." The officers led her out. She didn't fight. Outside, the morning light was blinding. The neighbors' curtains shifted. Someone was watching. Of course they were. He'd probably told them something too. The car waiting at the curb was unmarked, gray, impersonal. She slid into the back seat, the door closing with a soft thud that felt like a seal over her old life. Through the window, she saw her husband kneel beside their son, his arm wrapped around the boy's shoulders, comforting him. It was a picture-perfect tableau of paternal love. She wanted to scream that it was all a lie, but her voice was gone. As the car pulled away, she pressed her forehead to the glass and watched her home shrink into the distance, the white siding, the trimmed hedges, the porch swing that used to creak under summer evenings of laughter. Now it looked like a stage set, a replica of a life that had never been real. The drive was quiet except for the low hum of the tires. The woman in the front seat glanced back occasionally, offering thin smiles. "You're very brave," she said at one point. "Not everyone accepts help this gracefully." She didn't respond. Her eyes stayed on the window, on the blur of streets she recognized dissolving into places she didn't. When they reached the facility, everything moved like clockwork. Forms, signatures, questions. "Any allergies? Do you feel safe at home? Have you had thoughts of harm?" She answered mechanically, hearing her voice as if from a distance. "Safe at home?" The irony clawed at her throat. They led her to a small room, white walls, narrow bed, barred window. The air smelled sterile, the kind of clean that erases instead of restores. When the door clicked shut behind her, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor. Hours passed without shape. Eventually, she heard footsteps in the hallway, the muffled voice of a nurse. "Her husband said she's cooperative but delusional." Cooperative but delusional. The phrase circled her mind like vultures. That night, she dreamed of her son standing in the doorway, calling for her, but when she reached for him, her hands passed through air. She woke with her heart pounding, tears hot on her cheeks. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. A voice shouted. She curled up on the bed, whispering to herself, "This isn't real. This isn't happening." But the room didn't answer. The silence did. The days bled together in a blur of white walls, routine check-ins, and the soft hiss of overhead fluorescence that never dimmed, even at night. No clocks, no news, no time. She was handed pills twice a day, small, pastel, with names she couldn't pronounce, and though she pretended to take them, hiding them under her tongue until she could spit them into a tissue later, she still felt the edges of herself dulling, blurring, like she was becoming a version of the woman they claimed she already was. The nurses were kind in a mechanical way, faces fixed in gentle concern, voices lowered like they were always one word away from panic. "How are we feeling today?" they would ask, and she would smile, say, "Better," because that was the answer they liked best. Her husband visited once, near the end of the first week, wearing his mask of exhaustion and empathy, like a man forced to love someone broken. He brought flowers, daisies again. She stared at them as he spoke. "They say you've been quiet," he said. "That's good. Rest is healing." She looked up at him and said nothing, afraid of what might come out if she opened her mouth. He placed a photo on the nightstand. It was their son, smiling stiffly in a collared shirt, a backdrop behind him that looked like a lawyer's office. "He misses you," her husband lied, and she could tell by the way his voice dipped. "He just doesn't know how to handle all this." She looked at the photo and didn't touch it. He stood, placed a hand on her shoulder, and whispered, "You're going to be okay. We're all going to be okay." And then he was gone. The flowers wilted in a day. She spent her nights tracing cracks in the ceiling and replaying every moment that led to this, every word she hadn't questioned, every glance she'd ignored, every time she'd chosen silence over suspicion. Was it really just gaslighting, or had she built her own prison with polite compliance? She watched the other patients, some mumbling to themselves, some laughing at invisible jokes, some pacing with eyes glazed over, and began to wonder if madness was contagious, or worse, if it was seductively reasonable. On the 9th day, during a therapy circle, a woman across from her, a thin, sharp-faced woman named Delia, spoke without looking up. "They say I made it all up, but when enough people agree you're wrong, does it even matter what's true?" The therapist scribbled something. No one responded, but the sentence lodged in her chest like a splinter she couldn't reach. That night, she asked the nurse if she could write a letter. "To who?" the nurse asked kindly. "My son," she said. "It's not allowed," the nurse replied. "Not until your primary clears communication." "Has he asked about me?" she whispered. The nurse didn't answer, just smiled and moved on. In the silence that followed, she whispered into the dark, "I am still here." The next morning, she was summoned to an evaluation room. A doctor sat across from her late 50s, white beard, calm voice. "Your husband is requesting an extension," he said. "He believes you're not ready." Her stomach twisted. "I haven't done anything." "You've been cooperative, yes," the doctor agreed. "But there are still inconsistencies in your emotional presentation." "You mean I'm not crying enough? Or perhaps not processing?" "I am processing," she said. "I'm processing the fact that my life was stolen, and you're all helping him keep it." The doctor blinked slowly. "That sounds paranoid." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Convenient, isn't it?" That night, she stopped pretending. She took the pills, let them slide down her throat, and waited to feel herself vanish. But instead, something hardened in her. A sliver of clarity pierced through the fog. If she was going to survive this, she couldn't wait for someone to believe her. She had to become someone they couldn't dismiss. So the next day, she smiled brighter, sat straighter, said all the right words. In group therapy, she admitted to being overwhelmed, disconnected, emotionally fatigued. The therapist nodded, scribbled more. The nurses praised her progress. Within 4 days, her husband returned, flanked by a social worker and a staff liaison. "We're reviewing her discharge," they said. "She may be eligible for outpatient supervision." Her husband feigned cautious optimism. "If she's ready." She looked him in the eye and smiled. "I'm ready." They released her on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was blinding, but it felt less like freedom and more like stepping into someone else's life. She returned home to a house that still smelled like her but looked like him, her books removed from the shelves, her photos replaced with updated versions that cropped her out. Her closet had been rearranged, her favorite blanket gone. Her son was quieter now, his eyes older. When she hugged him, he hugged back, but not like before. She made dinner that night. Her husband sat at the table, reviewing a document on his phone. "Therapist check-in Thursday," he said casually. "Try not to miss it." "Of course," she replied. Her son said nothing, just ate. Later, when the dishes were done, she stood alone in the hallway, staring at the mirror. Her reflection blinked back, smiling, composed, presentable. But underneath it, something else breathed, something waiting, something that had learned, finally, how to lie back.